Yeah. So I'm starting the recording. So as I've told you before that I had one module to complete, which is the or rather part of the module, which is the rules versus discretion debate. But inflation was supposed to be covered by GC, but we have decided that I will also cover inflation, and she will confine her discussion lectures to only the open economy macroeconomics. So the plan is as follows that in this week, in today's class, I will just briefly go through what I had discussed on the rules versus discretion, the policy making part, whether we should go for counter-cyclical policies, respond to each crisis, or we should simply follow a certain rule and ignore short-run fluctuations. So I'm going to revise what I have discussed, and then tomorrow and on Wednesday, I'll try to finish up this module. Next week, I think I have classes on Monday and Tuesday, and I'll start inflation, which should not take too long. I think we'll be able to finish it in about 2 weeks or even less, and then we'll see. Then we can just go through topics which you want me to revise, or we can wait for some time and then start the revision. So, okay. Okay. So in macroeconomics, whether we look at the classical economics or Keynesian or even the monetarist counter revolution, whatever, whichever school we look at, there's a general uh, agreement that in the long run, the economy will settle at the full employment level. So, given population, we have a certain workforce size of the workforce, and the level of demand will be such that the amount which is produced by the entire workforce will be supplied, can be supplied. So, in the long run, there is no problem. Keynes, of course, differs and says that the long run is irrelevant. The classical says that the Friedman also says that the long run is more important. So you have debate around which is whether the long run is important or not. But there's unanimity that at any point of time, sorry, I didn't bring out my pad. So there's unanimity that at any point of time, in the long run, you have a certain population, and let us say 70%, 50% of the population will work.
Sir, sorry to interrupt, but are you presenting something?
Yeah, actually, I am presenting, but you need not. I started the slide, but I was not really presenting. So, can you see the slide?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So, what I'm basically saying is that we have a certain population, and out of this population, I'm getting I'm getting a labor force, the number of workers who are willing to work. So if I call this L and I'm calling this P, then we can, if we just put it in the production function, K is capital given. So if this L is substituted over here, I will get the full employment level of output. So in the long run, what the level of demand is such that the entire full employment output can be supplied. The demand is sufficient. Demand is not a problem. In the short run, what happens is your aggregate demand can be greater than or less than this full employment output level. So depending on whether it is greater or less, you can have unemployment in some time. On occasions, you may have to produce above the capacity. Okay, so maybe you have excess capacity, you're overutilizing your capacity. If you're lucky, you will also have full employment so that you are producing at exactly the optimal capacity. But in the short run, you have fluctuations. So basically, what happens is in the long run, your capital, your population grows, and therefore the full employment output is increasing like this. This is the long run growth. In the short run, what happens is, depending on the level of demand, you have fluctuations around this long run growth. So this is the short run and this is the long run. So you can see that in this range you have your demand is greater than the long run demand. On the other hand, so this is a boom period. Here you have recession, you have slumps. Your demand is less than the full employment output level. Okay. And this is, of course, these points are, of course, where the economy is at exactly the full employment level. So, when you have these, if you have full employment, it's fine. But as you have seen, full employment is just it's very rare that you have full employment. You'll generally have excess capacity or you will have overutilization of capacity. So you have a destabilized economy. The economy is away from the long run of full employment output. And in such cases, you can have various short run problems due to disequilibrium. Now, how to tackle this short run disequilibrium? The government has two options. One is that the government can observe what is happening in the economy, whether there's a boom, whether there's a slump, what is the cause of this short run disequilibrium, and the government can exercise discretion and decide to respond in a manner which it believes is appropriate. The other alternative before the government is to stick to a rule. It looks at the long run growth and adopts a rule which facilitates or maximizes this long run growth. So what will happen is you'll have short run fluctuations, okay? But these fluctuations are believed to be self-correcting. So they will come back to the full employment and then they will go to the other extreme. You should not try to destabilize. If you try to respond to these crises, short-run fluctuations, you will actually destabilize the economy and increase the oscillations in the economy. So the discretionary policy says that you should adopt counter-cyclical policies and reduce the oscillations. The rules policy says that if you try to act in a discretionary manner, you're simply going to increase and the oscillations. You're going to destabilize the economy further. And so it is better to stick to a long run rule. So is this clear?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So the counter-cyclical policies are intuitively very attractive. If you have unemployment, you introduce policies to curb unemployment. The problem is that if you can introduce counter-cyclical policies in an efficient manner, it's fine. There's nothing better than it. The problem is that theoretically it's possible to introduce counter-cyclical policies very effectively, but when you come to the ground level realities, counter-cyclical or discretionary policies has certain limitations. The limitations are lags in the effect of policies, expectations of agents and their reactions, uncertainty and how it interacts with economic policy. So let's go into these issues in more detail. Before starting the discussion, let me just define certain concepts. The first concept is targets. So we assume that the policymaker has some goals of policy which are clearly identified. It wants to control unemployment below 3%. It wants to ensure that unemployment does not rise above, let us say, 4%. The budget deficit should be 2.5% of GDP. So these are targets. Targets can be divided into two parts, intermediate and ultimate. Intermediate targets are that you have a goal, okay? Or it's better to start from the other end. You have an ultimate target. These are targets which you want to achieve. So you want to control inflation, you want to control unemployment, you want to control budgetary deficit. In order to do so, or rather, let's drop the third part, budgetary deficit. We want to control inflation, we want to control unemployment. We want growth rate to be above a certain level. These are ultimate targets, what you want to achieve. Now, in order to achieve these targets, you have some instruments. Okay. So there are some other variables which influences these ultimate targets. For instance, your budgetary deficit if it is very large, it will lead to the price level rising. Okay. So the budget deficit and inflation are related. The inflation is your ultimate target. Your objective is to control inflation. You're not really concerned with the budget deficit as such. But if you want to control inflation, you cannot allow budget deficit to run away. So that means you must also set a target for budget deficit. So this is what we call an intermediate target. So as such, you're not concerned with budget deficit, but you need to set a target for budget deficit so that your ultimate goal, which is inflation, is ensured. Is the distinction clear?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay. The second part is instruments. Instruments are the tools which are used to achieve your targets. Monetary supply, fiscal policy. Within fiscal policy, you have government spending, you have taxes. Now, when you're using these instruments, you have certain variables which indicate that, okay, are you attaining your targets? Are you coming close to your targets? For instance, if you look at growth, I don't know whether you have read it in the last year. I don't think you joined the course at that point of time. Maybe you did. Well, I mean, there was a paper by Raghuram Rajan in which he looked at the growth rate in certain sectors, consumer goods sectors, sorry, automobile sector, for instance. He identified 16 sectors which are closely related to the GDP growth rate. So, if you do not have immediate data on the GDP growth rate, I mean, normally it. Sorry, is there a problem?
Sir, what do you mean by grossly related?
Just one second. Wait. Sorry.
Sir, what do you
Yeah.
mean
So
by
what I'm
grossly related?
no GDP. I said GDP. So GDP. See, the problem with GDP is it takes time to calculate. Generally, if you want to calculate the growth rate for, this is the financial year. So this figure will be available around 2023 after about 2 years. So if you have a target for GDP growth should be, let us say, 7%, and you introduce a policy. How do you know whether your policy is successful or not? For instance, let us take this year. So 1st April 2021 to 31/3/22. Your target GDP growth is 7% per annum in this year. So that means in this period, you introduce certain monetary and fiscal policy. Right? Now, when is this figure available? The actual GDP figure will be available around 24. So, how do you know whether your monetary or fiscal policy is successful or not? By 24 is useless. I mean, it's already over, right? So, what we often do is we look at certain indicators. We don't have the actual GDP, but we have certain indicators, certain variables which reflect GDP. Like in Rajan's paper, he identified I think about 16 sectors. If these sectors are growing fast, it means GDP is also growing fast. Okay. Now the data for these 16 sectors are available more quickly. So what you can do is you can focus on these sectors, or at least some of these sectors, where the data is quickly available. And that will help you to decide whether the instruments that you're using are successful or not. If they're successful, fine, continue. If they are not succeeding, you should change course. For instance, if you want to know whether the economy is picking up and you're just sitting in front of and I tell you that you don't have internet, your mobile phone is taken away, you cannot leave your room. You don't have access to television also. Can you give a simple indication of whether the economy is growing fast or not? or whether everything is stagnant. A very, very simple, a very crude indicator. It's very crude.
স্যার আরেকবার ইন্ডিকেটরস গুলো বলবেন?
মানে ইকোনমিটা পিক আপ করছে কিনা, গ্রোথ রেট বাড়ছে কিনা, প্রোডাকশন অ্যাক্টিভিটি বাড়ছে কিনা কম্পেয়ার টু দ্য লকডাউন পিরিয়ড। মানে তখন যখন তোমার মার্চ এপ্রিলে মানে মে জুনে when the lockdown was introduced, has the economic activities picked up? You're not allowed to leave your room, you're not allowed access to television or internet. Can you suggest a very crude indicator?
Sir, transportation.
Yes, the number of cars, the number of people who are moving about, it's very, very crude. But compared to say May and June, both of them has gone up. Look at the number of private cars going about. Look at the buses going about. It has increased compared to May, June. So this is an indicator. If you're a policymaker, you need a crude indicator of your target. Your actual target, the data on your actual target will come much later. By then, it will be too late. In 24, if you find out that your policy was not successful, will it help you? It's too late. If you find out that there was overheating, you're given too much incentive, then also it's too late. If you find out that you did not give enough incentive, you can't do anything. So you need, when you are introducing your policy, you need some indicators, variables which signal whether you're getting close to your targets or not. You need proxies basically. Okay? So you have targets, you have instruments to achieve these targets, and you have indicators which signal in real time whether we are getting close to the targets or not. Is this clear, everyone?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now let's come to the limitations of counter-cyclical policy. The first limitation, as we had said, was that in the macro models that we have discussed, we assume that there's no time lag. As soon as there's some disequilibrium, some suitable monetary or fiscal policy change can be introduced, and then immediately you have the effect. Okay. Now, if you look at this Y star is the full employment output. Can you see my mouse? You can see that it goes on. Then in period T0, the economy enters into recession. The recession deepens over here, and then the economy comes out from the recession in T2. After that, it continues on the full employment level. So this black line indicates GDP without stabilization policy. So this is T0, this is T1. Now suppose the policy, as you can see that whatever caused the recession was temporary. There was a shock, but the shock was temporary. As soon as the shock passed away, died away, the economy recovered by itself. Now, if you don't do anything, the producers will see there's a reduction in demand, so the producers will accumulate extra stocks. Okay, so there will be a change in inventory, and this will help the economy to absorb the shock. Suppose you have a counter cyclical policy, right? But you have a time lag. So instead of introducing the policy at T0, the policymakers take time to realize that the economy has entered into recession. They realize the fact only in T1. So at T1, they realize that the economy is in recession. They start the policy, what to do, and the policy starts taking effect only from this period. Okay. Now, what happens is, at this period, the economy has started to recover. So now you have the natural recovery plus the impact of the counter-cyclical policy. So the actual trend of the economy will be along the blue line. Okay, and as you can see, the economy will overshoot itself. Right. So by the time in T3, if the government had not acted, the economy would have been at Y star. Instead, the economy is at a point which is above Y star. So now the policymakers have to introduce a contractionary policy. And then this again leads the economy to decline like this. So instead of just a short-run shock with the economy returning to Y star, if you introduce policy effects with a lag, you now have continuous fluctuations. They will die down, maybe. You can see that the length over here is less than the length over here. So it's going to die down, but you're going to have oscillations continuing even after the short-run effect shock has died down. So the stabilization policy, the counter-cyclical policy introduced to stabilize the economy, actually starts off a new cycle. See, if you know that the disturbance is temporary or it is permanent, if you can make this distinction, it's fine. For instance, in World War II or during any major wars for that instance, you know that the war is not going to end soon, and a large part of the productive capacity will have to be diverted to defense expenditures. So in case of World War II, you know that this is going to be a long-run shock. Therefore, even if there's a policy lag, it doesn't matter. What is going to have is, you're going to have is something like, sorry. World War starts, the economy is going to go like this. So, even if you have a time lag, you realize a depression has started, you introduce the policy over here, the policy starts taking effect, it's fine. You have time on your side. Right? But if it is short run, the economy will have jumped up like this. It's over here. So the policy takes effect, it means you're going to overshoot. The OPEC oil embargo, people believed at that time that it would be difficult to sustain the oil cartel. So the high oil prices was just a temporary phenomenon. They would soon decline in a few months. Well, it did decline. oil prices did fall after some time, but that after some time turned out to be 12 years, which is huge in terms of policy making. It's almost 2.5 governments. So even if policymakers realize that the shock is of a more permanent duration, the problem of time lag is important. Now, what are the different time lags? First is the insight time lag, the time taken to implement a policy action. Okay, so the shock occurs and you start implementing the policy. Now, this insight lag can be divided into two parts. One is the recognition lag. The policymakers have to realize that the crisis has started. After they realize that the crisis has started, they decide to act. Generally, it takes about 5 months for the policymakers to realize that there's a shock, because it takes time for data to come in. Decision lag, it's shorter for monetary policy, because monetary policy, the monetary committee sits every month, so you can implement the monetary policy pretty quickly. Fiscal policy takes longer, because often you have to pass the bill through the government. Action lag is you decided, okay, this is what I'm going to do, and then introduce the policy. Nil for monetary policy, because it's the monetary authority who is the sole decision maker. But in the case of taxes, for instance, a tax bill has to be passed. You can have an ordinance in India, but still it takes time. So the action lag is longer for the decision lag, action lag, these are longer for fiscal policies. And if you add up the recognition lag, decision lag, action lag, that comprises the insight lag. Once you introduce the policy, now there's some time before it starts operating. Okay. So I've already discussed this, so I'm not going into this again. Now, what you can do is you can use automatic stabilizers. The tax rate is an automatic stabilizers. The insight lag becomes 0. See, these stabilizers are automatic machines, like they change when you have along with the economy. Income tax, why is it an automatic stabilizer? Income tax is T, the small t, the tax rate, into income. So if you have a boom period, what happens is Y rises and automatically tax collections increases. If you have slump, automatically tax collection starts falling. But you just can't depend upon automatic stabilizers. I mean, maybe you want generally what you want is the income to be del Y should be, let us say, 2.7%. So associated with this is your tax multiplier. Okay. You have what you're basically seeing is this should be 2.7%. Right? Now you can solve this to find out that, okay, how much DT do you want? How much should DT be changed so that your income changes by 2.7%? And the problem is that this DT can be very large. It may become so large that it is impractical. Your tax rate will have to be changed by 15%. Is it feasible? It's not. So automatic stabilizers are again fine on paper, but if you want to implement it, you can use it only up to a certain level. to reduce oscillations, but you cannot use them to eliminate oscillations completely. Now, coming to the outside lag, as I've said, it's a distributed lag. I mean, it's not that you start a policy and after 5 months, the effect is there as a block. No, it's not like that. The impact is distributed over several periods. That is what we mean by a distributed lag. So that means if you are introducing the policy in T1, in T5, you have dy dt. No, that's not. What you have is you introduce the policy in T1. In T2, you have a certain dy dg. In T3, you have a certain dy dg. So the total impact of the change in government is spread over different periods. You can see that the government multiplier over here varies depending upon the time, the quarter. So in the first quarter, you have introduced the policy, there's no effect. In the second quarter, a very minor increase. See, this is 1, so it is probably about 0.2. Over time, the increase goes up. In the fourth quarter, which is about 1 year, it becomes 1.5. Generally, the impact of government policy is maximum from 8 to 12 quarters. And then it starts declining. So the impact is something like this. It goes up and then goes down. This is roughly 8 to 12 quarters. Okay. Now, what is the policy on this? See, sometimes if it's a temporary shock, we will want an immediate effect. Otherwise, an effect coming after 24 months. 8 quarters, right? 8 quarters is 8 into 3, 24 months. It's too long. You want an immediate effect. But remember that over here, your multiplier is very low. Right? So your total impact is M1 into dm, M2 into dm. This is in the first period, this is in the second period, and so on. M1 to M4 is low, M8 to M12 is high. Let us make a simplified assumption that M1 to M4 is 0.01, M8 to M12 is same, it is 4. We want the increase. Let us say that the M is 1 million. You inject 1 million into the economy. What will be the immediate effect? M1 into DM, 0.01 into 1 million, which is 10,000. This is acceptable. But from the 8th period onwards, the multiplier value has gone up. Now it's too much. You're overheating the economy. So let's reduce the money increase in money supply. We make it 1,000. In M8, it's fine. 4,000 is fine. But in the immediate period on which we are focusing, what is the increase? Marginal. It's too low. You're not having any impact on the economy. Your counter-cyclical policy, the objective is to deal with the short-run crisis. You fail because you have injected in too little funds. Is it clear, everyone? Or will I repeat it?
It's clear, sir.
So if you want to increase, let's say, the employment level rapidly, you require a large increase in money supply. The problem is this will lead to overheating after about 2 years. So that means you have to balance these short run and long run considerations. You have the monetary policy, the interest rate. This leads to an increase in interest rate, change in interest rate. The interest rate leads to a change in investment, consumption or savings also changes. This leads to a change in aggregate demand. Okay. So the entire process is so long. That is why we are having this problem. Generally, if you compare between lags, monetary policy has the shorter inside lag. The time taken to implement monetary policy is faster, but it has a longer outside lag. The impact of monetary policy is longer. Fiscal policy takes a long time to implement. It has a long inside lag, but the outside lag is small. Its effect is quicker. You have it's not a stage-wise increase like this. The steps are quicker. Another issue is whether you should, okay, for somehow you have decided that you want to increase money supply by a certain amount. You have decided on the amount that you want to increase in. Let us say we call it del M, whatever this value of del M is. You can suddenly increase del M. So that means in the first quarter you can inject the entire del M. This is called a cold turkey. So the increase in money supply itself will generate a shock. The advantage is it can increase credibility of the policymaker, but it can be hugely disruptive. On the other hand, what you can do is you can split up the increase in money supply over several quarters. Gradualism, what we call it. We move the economy slowly towards the target. We allow the agents time to incorporate the new information so that the disruption is minimized. The problem is, in the case of short-run crisis, if everything is slow, by the time you complete your action, the economy is reviving by itself. So you can see that on theory, counter-cyclical policies are best, but on paper, it's very tricky. One way of tackling the lags is to forecast future economic conditions. If we can somehow predict that the economy is going to be in a boom or recession after, let us say, so many quarters, we can plan ahead. We can start introducing appropriate counter-cyclical policies beforehand. We can use leading indicators. What I talked about, the proxies for the targets, to build up a macroeconometric model. And using after you build up the macro model, you can plug in the historical data, estimate the model parameters, and use it for forecasting. So you can see that, okay, after 6 months, this is going to be the policy. So let us tinker with it. Let us increase money supply. Okay. If I increase money supply by 2%, I'm going to overshoot. Let us reduce it to 1%. No, I'm undershooting. Yeah, but if I do it at 1.5, I can just counteract the shock. So you can use forecasting models. The problem is, as you can see in the cartoon, or you can see in this example, that in BBC, which is has a very good Met Office, October 14, 1987, the predictions were for light showers, bright intervals, moderate winds, and instead we had Britain's worst storms. The Great Depression, it completely caught the economist forecasters by surprise. Even after the shock started, they were confident that the economy it was just temporary. In 31, Irving Fisher said that the economy would recover quickly. Again, look at the red line. This is the actual growth path. The green are the predictions. You can see that each of the green, you're starting from this point, but as you're predicting, you're moving further and further away from the red line. this prediction in particular, May 2009 was fairly accurate, but all three, particularly these three, are inaccurate. And if you look at this, you can see that longer the time horizon, you're going to make more errors. Over 2 quarters, fairly accurate. Distant forecast, well, you can just pick up, play cards, tarot cards, or whatever. So after this time lag, apart from the time lag, how do agents react? Okay. See, this part comes through the multipliers. When you have, see, dy by dm is equal to, you have a multiplier, right? The money multiplier. dy by dt, you have the tax multiplier. dy is your target, dt is your instrument. The multiplier depends upon behavior, the reaction of the agents. What the government does is to look at econometric model. They build up econometric models, and I'll try to show it to you. Yeah. Okay. So I've opened the data set. Let me see. Let me generate the data. Yeah. So I have got data on income. This is data on consumption. Okay. So I have data on Y. I've got data on C. Right. And I want to find out the multiplier. What is the multiplier? It is 1 by 1 minus C prime. Am I right? Okay. Now how do I find C prime? I can find it out very easily. Okay. This is the value of the multiplier, C prime. I'm just estimating the consumption function, so I get the value of the marginal propensity to consume. If I have this income, how much will I consume? That is MPC C prime. So this is the value of the marginal propensity to consume. So what is my multiplier? How do I find out the multiplier? Just give me the formula. I'll find it out for you. I need the exact value of the multiplier.
Changing consumption by changing income.
No. What is the formula? You have
1
got C
over
prime.
1 minus
1
C.
by 1 by
1 by 1 minus.
Yeah. So it is 1 by, if you just look at this, drop the zeros, no, ignore the zeros. This is 1 minus C, right? Okay. Now let us see that, yeah, this was my multiplier. Yeah. Let us suppose that we have planned to increase government spending by 10,000. What will be the impact? This will be the impact. dy is equal to dg divided by 1 minus C prime. Right? This is what I've done. dg is 10,000 divided by 1 minus MPC. So how much does income increase? It increases by 16,784. Right? This is the increase in income. The problem is that this is just an estimate. It may not be the consumption, true marginal propensity to consume. We can say with 95%, we can say that in 95% of cases, it will lie between 0.37 and 0.43. Let us take, this is called the lower confidence limit. This is called the upper confidence limit. Okay, so let us work with these. I'm using the lower confidence limit. So the multiplier is 0.37. What is the change in income? It is only 16,000. If I use the upper confidence limit, what is the change? It is 17,680. If the what the policymakers will do is they will use the model estimate 0.4. But suppose they use 0.4 and the actual multiplier is 0.37. What is the percentage of error? Minus 4.5. Do you think that this is negligible?
No, sir.
It's huge. I mean, the GDP, what is the normal GDP growth? It is 7.5, 8.5, something like that. So if you reduce the GDP growth by this much, by 4.5, GDP growth becomes very low. If you go by, if the actual multiplier is the upper confidence limit, you're going to undershoot by 4.96. Again, this is pretty large. Okay, so what we can see is that if you know the value of the multiplier, it's fine. The problem is we don't know it. I don't know the true model of the economy, so I don't know what is the multiplier. And if I don't know what the multiplier is, I really can't say what should be the appropriate dy, dg, dm, dt. I'm going to make mistakes. I'm either going to overshoot or undershoot. And as you can see from here, the level of error can be pretty large. The other problem is that, people have expectations. Agents, firms, consumers, households have expectations about policy. And once they have the expectations, well, they are expecting something and they get something else. This is going to create instability. And this is what we are going to discuss. But before that, any questions?
No, sir.
Okay. Suppose the government anticipates correctly that you are going to have a shock which is going to last for 1 year and is a positive shock which is going to increase the demand. So the government decides to introduce a contractionary policy. It's going to reduce the demands. So the government decides to introduce an expansionary policy via a tax cut. Now, because the shock will be over 1 year, the government decides that, okay, we are going to introduce the tax cut only for 1 year. After 1 year, we are going to remove this tax cut and go back to the earlier levels. Okay. Now, if the government can convince the agents that a tax cut is only for 1 year, it will not affect long-term income or spending significantly. So the temporary tax cut would have to be large. However, if the consumers believe that the tax cut will be continued even after the shock is over. So, whatever the government says, or maybe the government has not said anything, the consumers believe that the tax cut is a permanent tax cut and it will continue. So, in that case, the people are going to spend more out of the tax cut. They believe that, okay, our disposable income has gone up, not only in the very short run, but in the medium run. So let us go on a spending spree. In that case, if you just make a small tax cut, that would be sufficient to have a large impact on spending. On the other hand, I'm going back to this. If they believe that a tax cut is temporary, then they are not going to change their consumption patterns. Or they will do so, but in a very marginal way. So you need a very large tax cut. So depending on what the people believe, the tax cut will have to be large, or you can do with a small tax cut. Now, if the government guesses correctly, then they can introduce a small or large tax cut. But suppose they believe that consumers are myopic, they will accept this tax cut to be permanent, and believing it, they introduce a small tax cut. And actually, the consumers anticipate that the tax cut will be large and will be permanent. What will happen? You have a small tax cut, but you have this part. So that means the tax cut will not have any impact at all. On the other hand, the policymakers believe that the consumers expect the tax cut to be temporary. So they introduce a very large tax cut. But the consumers anticipate correctly that a tax cut is shorter. You're going to overshoot. So what the consumers believe, whether the government can anticipate this correctly or not, that becomes very important. Now, if the government reacts in a typical manner, so whenever you have recession, they always introduce tax cuts. Then you have some stability in expectations. People can anticipate what you're going to do. But if you react in a different way, discretionary way, deficits have become too large, so instead of a tax cut, you go for a monetary stimulus. Okay. So, in that case, what will happen is you have the monetary stimulus, demand increases, but people also believe that the government is going to introduce a tax cut. So, demand will also increase in anticipation of this tax cut. And when the public realizes after some time that a tax cut is not coming, you're going to have a reverse effect. Demand is going to fall. So that means you're going to have a destability. I mean, it's just the only way that you can have a stability in expectation is that you can teach these people that, okay, this is a situation, I'm always going to act in this way. And you actually do so. The problem is people observe what you're going to do, they form expectations accordingly, and if you deviate from the path, then you're going to get into trouble. It's just not enough that you're going to making the announcement that I'm going to do this. The announcement has to be credible. Policymakers have to become credible. And how can they do so? They can become credible. People will believe that they are going to keep to the promises if you behave consistently over a long period. In 2020, the lockdown was announced for 2 weeks. The government announced after 2 weeks the lockdown is going to be removed. It was extended. Third time, again the government announced that it's going to be withdrawn. It was actually extended. So the government is losing the credibility.
Sir, could you
In
show
the
the previous slide once? Thank you, sir.
in the European Union in the 1980s, the government said that if wages are going to increase and prices are going to increase, we are not going to devalue our currency. Well, policy they were not believed and inflation stayed high. But what happened is policymakers, I mean, people believe that okay, they are just saying this so that we act in a certain way. But if inflation continues, they are actually going to devalue the currency. But what happened was policymakers did not devalue their policies. Even when inflation increased, they stuck to their policy, they kept the exchange rate constant. So over time, people started believing, realized that the promise was going to be kept. So they adapted their expectations and inflation reduced. Then what happened was in 92, when the German unification occurred, the resulting changes led to all the governments to devalue the currency. Immediately, the credibility was dented. So, the credibility that was earned around the mid 80s by sticking to a policy was destroyed in a matter of months. Robert Lucas has argued, therefore, that economists should pay more attention to how people form expectations. You introduce a policy, but agents expect something else. Okay, so expectations will determine whether your policy is successful or not. And one of the aspects on which expectations are formed is what policy the government will follow. So when you are estimating the effect of a policy, you need to know that okay, I'm changing the policy. How will it affect expectation? Lucas argued that when you're looking at the Keynesian model, the classical model, eh, you're not really taking into account these expectations. So, expectations can play a role. You also have uncertainty. Why is there uncertainty? One is that you don't know what is going to happen. And the second is you don't know the ground in which the policy is going to be implemented. You don't know important variables in the model. You don't know the consumption function, savings function, investment functions. So, one is you don't know what the shock is, you don't know the correct model of the economy, you don't know what the behavioral function is, and you don't know what is the value of parameters of the coefficients. For instance, is your model, I'll give you an example. The first part is you don't know the correct model. What I mean to say is your consumption can be either a plus by plus c y square. This is a quadratic consumption function. A linear function is c equal to a plus by. So your consumption function can be this, or it can be this. Right? You don't know what is the true model. Second is, what is the value of this A, B, C? Sorry, this should be C. You don't know the value of these coefficients A, B, and C. So even if you have correctly guessed that it is the linear model, you have to know what is A and B. Even if you have correctly guessed it's a quadratic model, what is A, B, and C? As you have seen in the example that I showed you, you have used a linear model, but you don't know what the marginal propensity to consume is. So you can't find out what is the value of the multiplier. So if the policymakers are precisely informed, they know what the coefficients are. So if they know that a multiplier is 0.407, they can adopt an activist policy. But if you don't know whether it is 0.37 or 0.43 or something in between, or maybe even something outside, you're in trouble. So with poor information, if you adopt a very active policy, you're going to just introduce a whole lot of fluctuations in the economy. Therefore, you need to adopt a very conservative approach. If there's a large error, don't introduce a huge monetary stimulus. It will lead to a huge, if you make an error, it's going to have a huge impact. What you should do is employ a portfolio of policy instruments. Use both money and fiscal policy and hope that you have errors, but they balance out. What I'm seeing by balancing out is that suppose in the case of monetary policy, DM, the true effect is, let us say DM, but you overshoot. This is the error. Okay, in the case of fiscal policy, mu is the error. Okay, so what is the total effect on Y? Partly because of the monetary policy, partly because of the fiscal policy. Right. See, now what you have is theta minus mu. If you just had monetary policy, you would have an error of theta. If you had a fiscal policy, you would have an error of mu. But if you have a positive error here, a negative error here, what is the total error? Theta minus mu is less than both theta and mu. Your error will be less than if you just go for a single instrument. Is it clear?
Yes, sir. Sir, can you show the last slide once? Thank you, sir.
Okay. Okay. So if the takeaway lesson is that if you know what is the size of the multiplier, it's fine. We can introduce a policy with confidence. But if you're not sure about the size of the multiplier, we should use the policy with great care. William Brainard has published a very interesting paper in which he examines this. using a very simple model. Uh, the impact of monetary policy on income is given by y equal to bm. So if money supply is m, you have beta, this is your income. Let us say beta is 0.2. Okay, I'm just giving an example. Let us say beta is 0.2. No, sorry, let's make it larger. Let us say beta is 2. So if m is, let us say, 100, what is y? What is the value of y?
200.
200.
It is 200.
200.
Okay. Now let us say we have a target income level y star. Okay, so we want y star, let us say we want y star to be 300. Right. So if beta is 2, what should be m?
150.
150. Acha. The problem is, suppose you're not sure about this value. Beta can be 2, it can be 2.5, it can be 1.5. Or let's make it simple. It can be 3 or it can be 1. In that case, can you tell me what should be your m? If beta is 3, what should be your m?
100.
And if beta is 1?
300.
200.
Yeah. So if you don't know what is beta, beta can be 1, 2, and 3. And remember, in reality, it can be also values in between. You can't determine what is m. So we have a target income level y star, but we are not sure of hitting this target. So we define a loss function. What is the cost if we don't hit the target? And this is given by 0.5 y minus y star square. Okay. Now y is, so that means this is the error and it's a quadratic term. Okay. So greater the error, the loss is, I mean, if you're increasing error, the loss increases very sharply. It's a function like this. Now, y is beta by m, beta into m. So you simply put this here. So if you have large miss, your loss is greater, small miss, your loss is less. We define the marginal loss function.
So can you show the previous slide once? Thank you, sir.
So we define a marginal loss function. This is simply the derivative of the loss function. Okay, so if you differentiate this, this is 2, it comes down. You simply have this. We define m is the variable. So I hope you can find it. Right? It's very simple. So if you know what the multiplier is, you can simply substitute you know what y star is, you know what beta is. You can simply set ml equal to 0, substitute the values and solve for m. The target is hit exactly and the minimum loss is 0. Okay. Is it clear? Y star is suppose 3, so you put in 3 over here. Beta is 1, you put in beta equal to 1 and you set this equal to 0. Beta is again 1 over here. So what is the term? Beta is 1 into 3 minus y star is 3. This is 1. Sorry, you don't know what is m. Okay. So this is m. This is 0. So m minus 3 is 0. M is equal to 0. So you get solve for m. It's not a problem. Suppose the multiplier is unknown. It can be either 1.5 or 0.5. And both events are equally probable. This is called the certainty equivalence. Okay. That if your expectation is of this is equal to 1, we call it certainty equivalence. Expectation 1 means it's certain. So you can have two types of errors. If beta is equal to 0.5, we undershoot. Beta 1.5, we overshoot. Okay. Now, if we overshoot, the marginal loss is greater. Okay, so we put in 0.5 over here. Beta. We put in the values of this 0.5 is the probability. Okay. So probability, the loss, plus probability, the loss if you overshoot. So 0.5, this is the value of beta m minus y star. Y star is, well, let's say y star is 3. Okay, 0.5, you overshoot, so it's 1.5 y star. Okay, and this is beta is again there, this function. Beta m minus y star beta. So this is, I'll write it down so to make it easier. Okay. So P1, the probabilities are equal to 0.5. Beta 1 is equal to 0.5. Beta 2 is equal to 1.5. And y star is equal to 3. But we set y star equal to 3 at the last step. Okay. So we put in the values of beta over here, set it equal to 0. We solve for m. This is y star by 1.25. This is 3, 1.25. So we get 2.4. So it is better to be cautious. If you're uncertain, see over here, what is m? It is 3. What Brainerd says is, if you don't know what the value is, increase money supply, but not by how much you expect. It should be effective. Instead of 3, it should be reduced by a lower amount. Okay. Now, one question is, should policymakers respond only to major shocks? Or should they adopt an activist policy and attempt to fine-tune the economy through appropriate counter-cyclical policies? I mean, I'm not going into this, but please read it from the Dornbusch paper, this description of this graph. You can see that this is the federal funds rate. So this is the instrument. Unemployment and inflation is the other targets. You can see that when unemployment is going up, they are adopting a very extreme activist road. Okay. And as a result of this, they are able to, I mean, during Volcker's time, Greenspan's time, the stock market crash, when Bernanke became the Fed chair, they very successfully, with varying degrees of success, they tried to fine-tune the economy by modifying, revising the interest rates. Okay, so this is a period. This is a period when they reduce the interest rate. In the first period, they increase the interest rate. Now things are quieting down, so quieting down too much. So they are also reducing interest rate, which means that investment should go up. here you can see that, I mean, they're really, it's not very successful in this point. It's a bit failure. So in some periods they are successful, in others they have failed. If you have an extreme long run shock, an activist policy is required because there's no uncertainty about expectations, uncertainties, time lags. You should go for a very activist policy. In depression, the time lag issue is not important. Monetary, fiscal expansion, tax cut would have helped during the Great Wall Street collapse. There's no chance that the economy will suddenly start recovering by itself and booming. The Second World War also is a similar case. I mean, Hitler will suddenly not get up, would have got up and said that, look, I was a vegetarian, I've become a non-veg, and so I'm going to stop the war. So in these cases, an activist policy can be safely introduced. There will be errors, but you'll also have time to correct the errors. Fine-tuning to counter business cycles is more difficult because you require a case-by-case response to shocks. Fiscal policy, you have long inside lags. They are not at all effective in fine-tuning economy. You can rely on automatic stabilizers to some extent. Monetary policy is more important, but the extent of change, whether you should go for a small response, you have to distinguish between transitory or permanent shocks. The level beyond which you are going to respond, these are issues on which decisions are necessary if you want to fine tune. So if you have a very small shock, it's very easy to say that don't respond. But what do you mean by small shock? If you have a temporary shock, don't react. The economy will adjust by itself. But how will you know that it's a small shock? So in general, small fine-tuning response is desirable because, as we showed in the model, that modest policy will minimize the loss. But the problem is, policymakers are just like people. They get overly ambitious. They see that the policy is being successful, and so they say, okay, let's carry through it. Let us go for large changes, and then it's going to start destabilizing the economy. So I don't know how many of you have. Okay, I'll come to that. So in such cases, Friedman and others have said you should use an autopilot system. Formulate a rule, a predefined rule based on your long-term trends, and then don't depart from this. An example is a constant growth rule, 4% per annum. And then you can say that if the money supply grows, if you have a natural rate of unemployment of 5.5%, if unemployment becomes 6%, 6.5%, increase money supply by 2%. If unemployment becomes 7.5%, increase money supply by 4%. So for every 1% increase above the natural rate, increase money supply by 2%. Do you understand this rule? This is a type of rule. Okay. Mathematically, you can formulate this in this way. U is the natural rate, actual rate. 5.5 is the natural rate. So if it is greater, 2%. So suppose the unemployment rate is 7.5%. What will be the optimal money supply growth? Can you tell me? So normally the money supply should grow at 4%, but if depending on the level of unemployment, you should increase or decrease this money supply growth. So if unemployment is 7.5, what is the increase in money supply?
0.
Why?
So if we plug in the value of u in the del m by m equation,
Yeah, so what do we get?
if we put 7.5, then 7.5 minus 5.5. Oh, sorry, that's plus. Sorry, I thought that's a minus. I noted it down wrong. Then 8.
It should go up by 8. If
Yeah.
it is 4.5,
Then it will be 4.5 minus 5.5. So it will be 3. Sorry, 2.
yeah, and 3.5,
So 0.
it should be 0. So a counter-cyclical policy, you have a counter-cyclical policy, but there's no discretion. You announced a rule, people know exactly what you're going to do. If you had listened to, I don't know how many of you have listened to the lecture by Kaushik Mitra. It was the best of the series so far. He is referred to Taylor's law, Taylor's works. Uh, Taylor had formulated a principle of how to set the interest rate. It is given by a rather complicated formula. It's actually much simpler than what it looks like. Pi star, this is pi means inflation. So pi star means the star indicates target, and if it's without star, it means is the actual. And t is obviously the time period. So I is interest rate, pi is inflation, and y is of course income. So suppose inflation is 5% above the target rate. So this should be actually the inflation rate is suppose 5% above the target rate. GDP is 1% above target rate. What should be the interest rate? Let us suppose that normally there is no inflation, so pi star t is 0, inflation rate is 5%, and GDP is 1% above the target rate. So okay, so let's write down the equation. What is pi t?
So it's 5%.
5%.
Okay. Pi t is 5, and let us say, assume the target rate is 0. And how much is this value? This is 1%. Okay. So 2 plus 5. This is 0.5 into 5. It will be 2.5. And this is 0.5. So how much? 3, 8, 10. So, what is the inflation rate? It should be 10%.
Sir, could you show the previous slide once? Sir, not this, sir. The next one. Taylor's.
This one.
Yes. So over here, the 5%. Don't we take it 5/100? Sir,
Yeah.
so for the inflation, don't we take it 5/100?
Inflation rate 5/100. Okay, I'll just check once. But anyway, you get the basic idea, right? You have to put in the value over here. So
Yes.
you need to know what is pi t, pi star t. I mean, again, over here, I've assumed that pi star t is 0, which is not often true. I'll
So
let you know about that.
IT is the interest rate, right?
IT is the interest rate. It is our in our model we have used R. Okay, so I'll end at this point, and I'll come back in the next class.
Sir,
I've been
can you show me two slides, like an activist policy, that slide and the slide after that?
this one.
Yes, sir, and the next one, please.
এটা দেখি বলে না তারপর আমি পরেরটা দেখাবো।
হ্যাঁ হ্যাঁ হয়ে গেছে, আমি যেটা
আচ্ছা।
Sir, what will we? Which book should we study all this from?
I've mainly followed Dornbusch and Fisher.
Thank you,
I'll
sir.
let you know in a moment. Dornbusch and Fisher, chapter 17, Mankiw, chapter 16.
Thank you, sir.
Okay. So I'll stop the recording.